Most fans believe Ciaphas Cain was a coward who tripped from one disaster to the next and somehow came out looking like a hero every time, but that is far from the truth, because if his life is analyzed from start to finish, an unexpected truth reveals itself. But to better understand his character, we have to start at the very beginning. His story did not begin on a battlefield. Instead, Cain spent his childhood in the Schola Progenium, the Imperium's training academy for its future political officers. Both parents had served in the Imperial Guard. However, the Kroot, alien mercenaries employed by the Tau Empire, had killed them both, leaving the young orphan in the care of the state's institutional system. He was placed on the Commissariat track, trained to become one of the officers who stood at the front of every battle, enforced obedience, and accepted that a short life came with the job. If political officers died young, then the young recruit would learn how not to. He graduated with average marks in almost every subject. The exceptions were athletics and combat training, where he showed genuine talent with a blade and sharp survival instincts. Nothing in his early records suggested the legend that would follow. As detailed in the omnibus Ciaphas Cain, Hero of the Imperium, the newly assigned officer chose his first posting with the Valhallan 12-field artillery for a single reason. Artillery units sat in the rear, throwing shells from a safe distance. And if those shells proved insufficient, crews sat near the top of the evacuation list. That logic held exactly until his very first combat deployment on the world of Desolatia. A routine engagement against greenskins suddenly became a Tyrannid invasion. Facing alien horrors he had never trained for, the young political officer tried to desert. Grabbing a vehicle, he drove away from the fighting, only to crash directly into an undetected flanking swarm, closing in on his regiment's position from behind. He turned around, screaming into the Vox for every gun in range to open fire on his coordinates. He called down a barrage that wiped out the alien swarm in a single, devastating volley. His regiment believed their new officer had gone on a daring scouting mission, leading the Xenos into a kill zone on purpose. Colonel Mostru, his commanding officer, never fully believed the story, but he remained the only voice of doubt. Admitting the truth would have meant execution for desertion, though the reluctant hero accepted the praise and let the lie stand. That single moment set the pattern for everything that followed. Every time he tried to avoid danger, he stumbled into something worse. Every escape made him look braver than he felt. Every act of perceived courage earned a more dangerous assignment, leading to another desperate escape, leading to even more praise, and the cycle never stopped. By the time the young officer requested a transfer to the newly formed Valhallan 597th, he had already built the early foundations of his legend, a reputation for leading from the front, a natural ability to read people and manage their expectations, and at his side, an aide named Ferric Jurgen, a loyal gunner who took every order at face value, following him without question into any fight, though the aide's particular talents would not be fully understood for years. He also carried something harder to define, survival instincts so sharp that his palms would itch, and a voice in the back of his mind would warn him before anything had visibly gone wrong. Those instincts, combined with the ever-widening gap between who he believed himself to be and who the Imperium thought he was, would shape every campaign and every impossible victory across a career spanning more than a century of war. Chapter 1. Service with the Valhallan 597th. The Valhallan 597th did not exist when its future leader first arrived. What he inherited were the broken remains of two regiments that despised each other. As the book For the Emperor records, his time at brigade headquarters had been spent on increasingly lethal special assignments, from clearing abandoned space hulks alongside space marines to conducting reconnaissance behind enemy lines. A standard regimen, he reasoned, would let him manage expectations and stay away from the sharp end of combat. The 597th had been pieced together from the combat-shattered remnants of two single-gender Valhallan units. One was an all-female garrison regiment, the 296th. The other was an all-male planetary assault formation, the 301st. A recent Tyrannid invasion on the world of Kyrania had torn both to half strength, and the Imperium's vast bureaucratic machine merged them rather than spending resources on reinforcements. On paper, the combined unit formed a full regiment. In practice, the resentment ran deep enough to kill. The assault troops considered themselves elite soldiers, looking down on the garrison background of the women's unit. Colonel Castine, promoted from the garrison command structure, and Major Brocklaw, the senior surviving officer from the assault formation, were barely speaking when the new political officer stepped aboard the transport ship Righteous Wrath. At their very first meeting, Brocklaw tested the new arrival's grip strength with a crushing handshake. He discovered that the officer's mechanical replacement fingers, fitted after a previous deployment, could squeeze back hard enough to drain the color from his face. That small moment of physical dominance set an early tone, but cannot fix the deeper problem. A fight erupted in the mess hall over something as trivial as regimental dinnerware. It turned deadly within minutes. By the time the commissar walked through the door, 3 people had died, 14 more lay in the infirmary, and the room was wrecked. Troopers from both halves of the regiment stood ready to continue killing, and every eye tracked the black uniformed officer as he entered. His response went against everything the Commissariat traditionally stood for. He did not draw his bolt pistol. He did not execute anyone. Instead, he pointed at a trooper, ordered them to get a broom in his best loud commanding voice, and announced that nobody was leaving until the mess hall had been cleaned. Deeply learned military discipline took over where rage had been driving the moment before. Troopers began following orders simply because a political officer had given them. The violence stopped. One injured military police officer was overheard telling his shipmates that it had been the bravest thing he had ever seen. A single man standing down an entire room full of killers. But stopping the riot only addressed the surface. The regiment remained split, and unless he found a way to bring both halves together, these soldiers would destroy each other long before any enemy had the chance. His approach combined several deliberate moves. He ordered squad-level integration, mixing men and women from both former units, so they had no choice but to rely on each other in the field. He brought the worst offenders before a military court, arguing publicly for mercy over execution, stating that the fighting strength of the unit mattered more than making examples, and that trained soldiers should not be wasted when other options existed. He sentenced the officers to the most dangerous assignments rather than death. The troopers who watched him spare lives that any other commissar would have ended gave him a loyalty that no amount of fear could have produced. Among those sentenced were 5 troopers who would later play a critical role on the regiment's first real deployment. Kelp, a huge and aggressive man; Sorrel, a cold-eyed sharpshooter with the stare of a killer; Trebek, a scrappy fighter; Valad, a stocky brunette; and Holby, a timid young soldier who looked barely old enough to serve. They were spared from the firing squad, but marked for hazardous duty, a mercy that would cost some of them their lives within months. His third and most important move reshaped the unit's identity entirely. Rather than forcing either former regiment's name onto the combined formation, the political officer contacted the Imperium's bureaucratic administration, proposing a completely new designation, the Valhallan 597th. The number came from adding 296 and 301 together. This simple act honored both former units while giving everyone a shared identity to rally behind. Within months, the combined formation had transformed from hostile strangers into one of the most disciplined regiments in the Valhallan military tradition. As the novel notes, by the time the transformation took full effect, the only disciplinary problems involved romantic relationships between soldiers, a far cry from the fight that had once left 3 dead. The officer's own account framed every one of these decisions as calculated self-interest. A political officer who ruled through fear and executions would eventually catch a last bolt in the back during a chaotic firefight. One who treated soldiers well would have people watching out for him when things went wrong. Whether that explanation told the full truth, or whether the reluctant hero simply refused to give himself credit for genuine leadership, remained a question that followed his entire career. The 597's first major test came on the border world of Gravilax. Nothing about the deployment went as planned. Tensions between the Imperium and the Tau Empire had been rising for months. Pro-alien sentiment had spread through the local population, and Governor Grice, the planet's bloated and corrupt leader, had let the situation rot through bribery and neglect. Almost the moment the regiment made a planetfall, the political officer noticed the lack of civilians along their march route and the hostile atmosphere radiating from dangerous elements in the streets. Violence found him before he went looking for it. During an evening out with an old friend, Major Torin Divas, the 2 officers were ambushed by a pro-Tau crowd. Outnumbered and beaten, the reluctant hero fought back with his laser pistol and chainsword, but could not hold the attackers off alone. A Kroot mercenary named Gorok intervened, scattering the hostile group with a display of alien strength. The moment carried a bitter edge. The same species had killed the political officer's parents, sending him into the Schola Progenium as an orphan. Now one of those aliens had saved his life. He told the mercenary as much, noting that its kind were responsible for making him who he was. Gorak responded with a clicking sound that passed for laughter among its species and warned the officer to go carefully. The situation in the contested world exploded at a diplomatic reception. The Imperial diplomat Erasmus Denali was present alongside a suspicious rogue trader named Aurelius, whom both the political officer and later the Inquisitor suspected of being an undercover inquisitorial agent. A tall, slim, blonde singer with sharp, knowing eyes caught the reluctant hero's attention immediately. The two spent a pleasant few minutes dancing before everything fell apart. When the Tau ambassador was shot dead in the middle of the event, one of the surviving delegates drew a weapon and nearly executed the planetary governor on the spot. He stepped forward, using his name and his growing fame to talk the armed alien down. The account in the omnibus, Ciaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium, describes how the delegate recognized him as a man of integrity, a reputation that had somehow crossed species lines. By calming the room, he prevented a massacre that would have triggered a war the Imperium could not afford. But the assassination was only the opening move. A citywide revolt erupted across the capital, and the political officer found himself escorting the surviving alien diplomats through burning streets to their compound. He led a mixed squad of his newly unified 597th troopers through hostile territory, fighting off rioters and rogue local defense troops along the way. A young Planetary Defense Force lieutenant tried to stop the convoy, demanding the aliens be handed over. The reluctant hero shot him without hesitation and ordered his soldiers to open fire. That young officer's terrified expression stayed with him for years afterward, marking the first time he had killed a fellow Imperial. The deeper conspiracy became clear after the singer from the reception revealed her true identity. Inquisitor Amberly Vale of the Ordo Xenos had been posing as a lounge performer to investigate Xeno's influence on the planet. She could see through his carefully constructed image almost instantly. When she asked him to help investigate the source of the unrest, he agreed, partly because refusing an inquisitorial agent carried severe consequences, and partly for reasons that had nothing to do with duty. Their investigation led deep beneath the planetary capital. The team the Inquisitor assembled drew from an unexpected source. The 5 sentenced troopers from the mess hall riot, Kelp, Sorel, Trebek, Vlad, and Holby were given the finest equipment in the regiment and told they would earn their freedom if they survived. In the tunnels beneath the city, this unlikely group discovered that the unrest, the assassination, and the revolt were all the work of a gene-stealer cult that had embedded itself in the planet's government, military, and civilian population. These Xenos parasites had been destabilizing the border world to draw Imperial forces away from an approaching Tyranid hive fleet. What followed was a running battle that tested everyone who entered. The sentenced squad and their political officer joined forces with Tau fire warriors and Kroot scouts pursuing the same alien conspiracy from their own side. An uneasy alliance underground, while their respective factions nearly fought a war on the surface. Trebek was killed by enemy fire during the fighting. Then Kelp, the huge, aggressive trooper, turned on the reluctant hero in the dark. His aide destroyed the traitor with a blast from his thermal weapon before the man could land a blow. A tunnel collapse separated the political officer and Amberly from the gunner and the cold-eyed sharpshooter Sorel. The two pairs spent hours apart in the dark before reuniting at the governor's palace. Sorel was the first to die there. The planetary ruler shot the sharpshooter dead before revealing himself, dropping the mask of a corrupt but harmless bureaucrat to show thick plates of insect-like armor beneath his robes and a third, deformed arm hidden under the fabric. Grice had been a hybrid all along, the puppet master behind the entire conspiracy. The political officer shot the creature through the chest with a high-powered laser blast, but it survived, turning its weapon on the Inquisitor. Vale activated an emergency teleport device that moved her a short distance away, reappearing with the agility of a trained fighter and pointing an accusing finger at the hybrid. A bright flash from a carefully made ring on her finger, a concealed digital weapon, sent the governor writhing to the floor. Earlier beneath the palace, the reluctant hero had fought the Gene-Stealer Patriarch itself in close combat, one of the deadliest alien creatures in existence. He wounded the massive beast with his chainsword, buying enough time for his companion to close the distance and fire his thermal weapon directly into the wound, killing the brood leader and collapsing the cult with it. Two of the sentenced troopers, Valad and Holby, survived the tunnels and emerged looking like they had made it through the worst. They had not. Both were found to carry alien implants, organisms burrowed into their bodies that would have corrupted their genetic identity and turned any future children into hybrids. The political officer personally executed both of them before either could react. A cold decision, the kind of action his public image was not built for, but one that was necessary to prevent the infection from spreading. Gravelax also revealed the truth about the gunner after the Patriarch recoiled from the aide's approach, and after the Inquisitor's own psyker suffered a seizure just from standing near him. Amberly explained what Ferric Jurgen actually was: a blank. One of the rarest individuals in the galaxy, a living void that cancelled out all warp-based influence simply by existing. This explained why alien creatures hesitated around him and why he survived situations that killed everyone else nearby. She chose to leave the null in his role rather than recruiting him into her own team of specialists, reasoning that such a rare asset was safer hidden in a standard guard unit where nobody would think to look. The border world had given the reluctant hero three things that would define the rest of his career: a proven regimen that trusted him, a working relationship with one of the most powerful agents in the Imperium, and a secret weapon that no enemy would see coming. Senior Command had taken notice of the 597's performance, and the regiment was about to be deployed against an enemy far older than humanity itself, one that had been sleeping under the ice of a frozen world for millions of years, waiting to wake up. Chapter 2: Campaigns Across the Sector. The ice world of Samia Orichalci was supposed to be a simple defensive posting. A greenskin asteroid fortress was heading for a strategically vital Promethium refinery, and the 597th had been ordered to hold the facility until the Imperial Navy could deal with the larger threat. For the Valhallans, ice worlders by birth, the frozen terrain felt like home. Morale surged across the regiment. As the book Caves of Ice records, their political officer's enthusiasm ran considerably lower. When the transport caught fire during descent and lost an engine, he kept his composure outwardly. He calmly told the shaken troops that they had taken a dent and there would be a bump, all while bracing for a crash that could have killed everyone aboard. After the impact, he organized the survivors and began marching towards the refinery. He described himself in his memoirs as looking like an ogre at a beauty contest, his black and scarlet uniform standing out against the white snow, while every Valhallan trooper blended perfectly into the landscape. That visibility nearly killed him. A group of alien scouts spotted the lone dark figure and charged. Rather than panicking, the officer realized that he was the only target the enemy could see. He ordered his troops to hold fire until every one of the attackers had committed to the charge. The ambush wiped out the scouting party before a single survivor could escape. Inside the refinery, a different kind of battle waited. A young bureaucratic clerk named Scrivener Quintus immediately recognized the reluctant hero from a statue that he had seen in Liberation Square in the world of Tethon, one of the first times the political officer's fame had reached places he had never set foot. The senior administrator, Pryke, proved less welcoming, demanding daily progress reports and trying to obstruct military operations. A collection of tech priests cared more about production quotas than the army bearing down on them. When Pryke attempted to interfere with the defense, the commissar backed Colonel Castine by dropping his lace pistol on the conference table and calmly reciting the articles of military justice that allowed for execution of anyone blocking Imperial defense. The room went silent. The obstruction ended. The aliens hammering at the surface defenses turned out to be the smaller problem. An experienced minor leader named Morel reported that his workers had been vanishing underground for weeks. He had brought the disappearances to both the machine cult and the bureaucrats, being ignored every time. Told the losses fell within acceptable numbers. The political officer volunteered to investigate, partly to avoid the freezing surface, partly because enclosed tunnels felt more natural to someone raised in a hive city, where navigating cramped corridors had been a childhood survival skill. The tunnels hid ambles, massive burrowing predators with claws that could tear through armor plate. Sergeant Griffin led the exploration squad, with Trooper Penlin on point. When the floor gave way beneath Penlin, dropping her through a thin ice crust into a lower chamber. The reluctant hero went down after her. He came face to face with one of the beasts and killed it with his chainsword, driving the blade up through its open jaws in a motion he described as trained so deeply it operated on instinct alone. The troopers who watched saw only their officer slaying a monster without hesitation. Deeper in the tunnels, one of the predators killed Trooper Lunt. The political officer led ritual whirls, committing the soldier's soul to the Emperor, and his aide cremated the remains with his melta to prevent the body from attracting more creatures. One of the many small moments in the novel showing an officer who cared about his soldiers in ways that went beyond self-interest. His memoirs claimed otherwise. Then, the tunnels reveal something that made the burrowing predators look minor. The walls shifted from rough, natural stone to polished black architecture radiating a sickly green light. The reluctant hero recognized the construction instantly from a previous encounter on the world of Interitus Prime, where he had watched metal killers phase through solid walls and barely escape through one of their own warp portals. Beneath the ice world lay a buried Necron tomb. An active portal within it was allowing the ancient machines to move between worlds. Blade Ones stalked the lower tunnels, deathless warriors draped in the skins of dead aliens and humans. More dangerous still were the pariah constructs, projecting an aura of dread so intense it shattered the morale of veteran soldiers, leaving them unable to function. Only the gunner, whose blank nature shielded him from psychic effects, remained fully operational. His warp-canceling presence kept both himself and the political officer moving through the tomb, while others collapsed around them. Tech Priest Logash, a young adept attached to the expedition, became a source of both help and trouble. Obsessed with studying alien technology, the young Mechanicus scholar later defied evacuation orders, secretly returning to the tomb on his own. When the reluctant hero found him again during the final mission to destroy the portal, the adept was half mad with terror, muttering about the sacred mysteries of his machine god. Despite his state, the tech priest proved critical in the operation's final moments. The ancient machines outnumbered the entire regiment by hundreds to one. The political officer recommended total evacuation and an orbital strike to seal the tomb permanently, but the portal had to be destroyed first. A demolition team of stormtroopers, led by Sergeant Weed, accompanied the final mission underground. Most were killed by Necron fire, their hell guns barely slowing the advancing metal warriors. The demolition charges were lost with them. The reluctant hero came up with a solution born from desperation. Working with Logash, he accessed the refinery's control systems and dumped millions of liters of liquid promethium down the mine shafts, flooding the tomb. Before giving the order, his aide appeared at his side, carrying his thermal weapon, a flask of tea, and a sandwich, refusing to let his officer face the darkness alone. When the Imperial Navy ignited the fuel from orbit, the resulting explosions swallowed the valley in a storm of fire, and the regiment watched from their transports as a tide of metallic bodies emerged from the mine entrance, only to be consumed by the inferno. The evacuation itself nearly ended in disaster. A Gargant, the orc equivalent of a battle titan, arrived at the worst possible moment, its towering mass of scrap-built machinery and weapons looming over the landing pads. As the novel describes, the political officer noticed a deep gash in the construct's leg, ordering every available weapon to concentrate fire on that single weak point. The torrent of heavy bolter rounds chewed through the damaged metal. The towering war machine toppled, crushing a significant portion of the alien army beneath it as it fell. The surviving attackers scattered, and the 597th's guns finished them off. After the Ice World, the regiment concluded a campaign against orc forces on Castafor, but was pulled away before anyone could catch a breath. The deployment to Adumbria, as described in the book The Traitor's Hand, marked a turning point in the kind of enemies the reluctant hero faced. Until this campaign, he had fought alien threats that could be met with firepower and tactics. In this new world, the forces of the ruinous powers appeared at full scale for the first time. The planet had become a battleground between two rival factions of the Dark Gods, a Cornet warband called the Ravagers, and an internal Slaaneshi cult woven into the aristocracy. The political officer's role expanded beyond regimental duties into something closer to strategic advisor. He sat at the command table with Lord General Zyvan, planetary officials, and agents of the Inquisition. His reputation carried enough weight to influence decisions at the highest level. A rival commissar named Tomas Beige served alongside him in the war zone, openly viewing his record as inflated and his methods as showing off. His own troops now used his name as a battle cry. Enemy forces identified him as a priority target. The campaign produced one of the most dangerous combat encounters of the reluctant hero's entire career. He crossed blades with a World Eater, a traitor Astartes in the service of the Blood God, enhanced by both genetic engineering and the dark blessings of its patron god, one of the deadliest opponents a normal human could face in close combat. The political officer engaged the corrupted warrior with his chainsword, parrying and dodging, burying precious seconds until his companion closed the distance, firing his melta at point-blank range. The superheated blast destroyed the traitor, but the official report credited the kill to the commissar alone. Amberly Vale, who in her later notes called the reluctant hero the greatest swordsman she had ever encountered, pointed out that his habit of downplaying his own combat ability did not match his actual record. By this stage, he had fought greenskin warlords, alien warriors, and traitor Astartes in single combat, walking away from every encounter. He had beaten a loyalist space marine in a friendly duel to see who could land the first hit. He had bested an Eldar Exarch, one of the most skilled alien combatants in existence. Across his entire career, no record existed of him losing a single duel, either killing his opponent outright or holding long enough for allies to finish the fight. The stakes rose further when the Slaneshi cult succeeded in summoning a demon named Emily, a sorceress he had killed years earlier, now returned in demonic form. The entity attempted to tear open a permanent rift in reality, and only the gunner's null presence allowed the political officer to resist the creature's psychic pull, while everyone else in range stood paralyzed with unnatural sensation. Between the aide's melta and the combined efforts of the regiment, the entity was banished before the ritual could be completed. The Perimunda campaign, detailed in the novel Duty Calls, brought even greater dangers on a larger scale. What began as a response to a standard armed uprising revealed itself as a massive gene-stealer cult infestation, worse than anything seen since the Border World. The Xenos parasites had embedded themselves in the local defense forces and the civilian government. When a Tyranid hive fleet arrived, throwing a shadow in the warp across the system and cutting off all psychic communication, the planet became completely isolated from Imperial help. Fighting high-threat alien bioforms, including pure-strain gene-stealers, lictors, and hive tyrants during the defense of the capital, the political officer was credited with kills that his own account insisted were barely survived. A secret organization called the Covenant of the Blessed, a cult of rogue psychers serving the dark gods, was also active in the world. 3 of them attacked the reluctant hero directly: an old man, a young woman, and a boy wielding psychic lightning and projecting waves of despair nearly overwhelmed him. In a separate incident, an invisible, warp-gifted assassin struck at him inside a secure law enforcement facility, using a masking field to become undetectable. He fought the invisible attacker in melee and won, though he gave himself no credit for it afterward. The campaign exposed a rogue inquisitor named Killian of the Ordo Hereticus. He had been using the ancient Shadowlight artifact to force psychic abilities to awaken in ordinary humans, killing most of them in the process. His goal? A psychic army powerful enough to assault the Eye of Terror, regardless of the cost and lives. Working alongside a corrupt tech priest named Methius, the rogue agent had stolen the device from a Mechanicus shrine, setting up operations inside a Sororitas stronghold on the planet. In a final act of madness, Killian used a captive lictor, one of the Tyrannid's most dangerous scout organisms, to draw a swarm towards the planet. He used the alien invasion as cover for his escape, knowingly dooming thousands of civilians to death. Arbitrator Quiche of the Adeptus Arbites served as a key ally during the investigation, helping the political officer and Amberly track the radicals' movements. When the rogue agent was finally cornered, he tried to seize the Shadowlight from the gunner's hands. He did not know that the aide's null nature had been dampening its power the entire time. The unshielded energy killed him instantly the moment he stepped beyond the psychic void. The artifact was returned to secure storage, but the reluctant hero knew it would surface again, and that knowledge would prove correct decades later on a world he already considered home. By the end of this campaign, he had moved far beyond regimental service. The next deployment would take him to the one world where he would fight not once, but twice, decades apart, in battles that would define his name for the rest of Imperial history. Chapter 3: The Perlia Conflict. The troopship Hand of Vengeance was supposed to deliver the political officer safely to his next assignment. It did not. Greenskin psychers ripped the vessel out of warp transit before it reached its destination, dragging the entire Imperial fleet directly into an alien blockade. During a hull breach, the reluctant hero and his aide were trapped on the wrong side of closing bulkheads, forcing them to escape in a life pod. They drifted for 3 weeks through scattered wreckage before crash landing in the desert on Perlia's eastern continent. The situation on the ground had already passed critical. As described in the book Death or Glory, the first siege was a full-scale greenskin war led by war boss Gargosh Korbel. The planet held a bulk of Imperial factories and resources in the sub-sector. If the aliens captured it, they would have gained the means to overrun every neighboring world without opposition. Imperial High Command had already abandoned the eastern continent entirely, 12 million civilians left at the mercy of the alien horde. The political officer and his gunner linked up with a small planetary defense squad led by Sergeant Tabor in the town of Prosperity Wells. Despite every instinct screaming to run west towards friendly lines, his reputation trapped him. The soldiers and civilians expected him to be a hero, and emitting fear would have destroyed the one thing keeping them from collapse. What followed became known as the March of the Liberator. He organized a ragged fighting force from scattered defense soldiers, armed volunteers, and local militia. Felicia Tabor and Engine Seer maintained the column's fleet of scavenged alien vehicles, keeping machines running that had never been designed for human hands. Sergeant Satine commanded a surviving Lehman Russ battle tank the crew had nicknamed the Vixen. Norbert, a bureaucratic clerk, managed the critical supplies and rationing that kept the force alive as it moved. Ariat, a veterinarian, served as the column's field surgeon in the absence of any trained military medics, treating human wounds with skills meant for animals and somehow keeping people alive. A medevac transporting the troops called Kaiti carried the most severe casualties. This ragged column, held together by reputation, desperation, and a single thermal weapon, began fighting its way east to west across a continent of 12 million abandoned souls. The novel records several major engagements during the march. An attack to free civilian prisoners from an alien-held Mechanicus shrine in Prosperity Wells ended with the detonation of the town's Prometheum tanks, creating a firestorm that wiped out the local garrison, later cornered at a massive hydroelectric dam in the Valley of Demons by more than 7,000 of the enemy. The political officer realized his force could not survive a direct fight. He ordered a basilisk artillery piece to shell the dam's floodgates, collapsing the entire structure. The wall of water that followed swept through the valley, drowning thousands of the invaders in a single devastating flood. The climax came when the column stumbled into the headquarters of Korbel himself. In a close-quarters fight against the alien leader in heavy battle armor, the reluctant hero jammed his lace pistol into the greenskin commander's eye socket, pulling the trigger. The warlord dropped. The alien chain of command shattered with him. Imperial orbital sensors recorded the death, and Sector Command used the opening to launch a counteroffensive that broke the back of the entire invasion. An Imperial Navy airstrike then opened a gap in the retreating alien army during the final breakout. The battered convoy punched through the Imperial position at the land bridge connecting the two continents. By the time the column reached friendly lines, its leader had become Cain the Liberator, an icon of the Perlian resistance. His march across the eastern continent saved millions of lives and destroyed the enemy's command structure, though his own account described the entire experience as a series of desperate decisions driven by terror. The campaign brought the Liberator to the attention of the senior Commissariat, leading to his transfer back to brigade headquarters. More dangerous assignments, more impossible escapes, and even bigger legend. Decades later, the planet called him back. The second siege, recorded in the book Cain's Last Stand, took place in 999 Millennium 41 at the close of the millennium. By this time, the veteran had officially retired, serving as an instructor at the Schola Progenium, teaching future political officers alongside fellow veterans like Colonel Mostra. Then the 13th Black Crusade reached the sector, and retirement stopped being an option. The threat came from two directions at once. A warband of the ruinous powers called the Ravagers, led by a warlord named Varan the Undefeatable, invaded the system. At the same time, Tyrannid bioforms were discovered burrowing through tunnels beneath a Mechanicus shrine in the Valley of Demons, the same valley the Liberator had flooded during the first siege. Both forces were after the Shadowlight, which had been returned to secure storage after the events on Perlia Munda. With regular guard units deployed across the sector to meet the wider crusade, the retired officer organized his academy cadets into a fighting force. He coordinated between the local defense troops, the Adepta Sororitas under Sister Julian, and the Tech Priests. His old ally from the first siege, Engineer Tabor, secured the planet's technical resources. His strategy relied on professional veterans training civilian volunteers in basic weapons drills, providing a mental and emotional anchor for untested defenders who needed to believe they could hold the line. While the veteran and his cadets cleared alien nests full of Hormagaunts, Termagants, and Gene Stealers underground, the warband pressed their assault on the surface, trying to seize the artifact for War Master Abaddon the Despoiler. A three-way war. The retired officer held off two separate enemy forces that were also fighting each other. His aide, as always, stood at his side. Both men had received life-extending treatments provided by Amberly Vale, keeping them combat-capable despite their advancing years. The gunner's thermal weapon cleared tunnel blockades and destroyed high-threat alien bioforms. His null nature shielded the veteran from the psychic influence of both the device and the dark sorcery aimed at them. He personally confronted Varan and killed him. However, the Shadowlight was seized by Necron scouts, appearing at the battle's conclusion. The ancient machines presumably intended to destroy a device capable of creating Psykers, the one weapon their kind feared above all else. The political officer and the Inquisitor concluded that the Deathless would hide or destroy it rather than turn it against humanity, a gamble that rested on understanding alien logic well enough to predict their actions. For the second time, the Liberator had saved the world he considered home. After the siege, both the military command structure and the Inquisition treated his name as a strategic weapon that could stabilize entire systems simply by being attached to them. That kind of value brought a different type of service entirely, one conducted in secret, recorded only in classified files that no one in the Imperium was ever supposed to read, and it had been running parallel to his public career for decades. Chapter 4. Operations with the Inquisition. In the world of Slockenberg, a Slaneshi sorceress wrapped her psychic tendrils around the Commissar's mind, pulling him into a warp-induced trance. He stood frozen, chainsword in hand, unable to move or think while the witch tightened her grip. His aide walked straight through the psychic barrier as though it did not exist, raised his melta, and fired. The sorceress died. The trance broke. The political officer came back to himself, gasping for air. Not entirely sure what had just happened. It was one of dozens of classified missions he carried out alongside Inquisitor Amberly Vale over a career spanning decades, and almost none of them ever appeared in any public record. As described in the stories collected in Ciaphas Cain, the anthology, these operations were recorded only in restricted files kept under inquisitorial seal. The full scope of this hidden career emerged through what became known as the Cain Archive, the collection of personal memoirs the veteran wrote during his retirement on a single data slate, with no regard for order and no expectation that anyone would ever read them. Amberly discovered the archive and preserved it, editing the files and adding detailed notes of her own. She inserted material from other sources, most notably the writings of General Janet Sulla, to provide context that the political officer's self-focused narrative often skipped. She then circulated the completed archive among her fellow Inquisitors as a restricted resource. After their first meeting on Gravelax, the reluctant hero became what the Ordo Xenos agent called her occasional and extremely reluctant field agent. He performed life-threatening missions that regular military personnel never knew about. To keep him within reach, the Inquisitor helped arrange his appointment as Commissarial Liaison Officer to the staff of Lord General Zyven, while the political officer acted as the visible face of the Imperial Authority, drawing attention from local media and distracting officials. Amberly conducted her real investigations undercover, different identities, different planets. His celebrity kept all eyes pointed in the wrong direction. The most critical asset in these classified operations was not the reluctant hero, but his aide. The gunner's status as a blank proved decisive again and again. In the world of Lantonia, a warp-painted psyker uses telekinetic power to freeze the political officer's chainsword mid-swing, locking the blade in place through sheer force of will. His companion walked through the psychic barrier completely unaffected, firing his thermal weapon at point-blank range. On every mission where supernatural threats appeared, the aide's null field was the difference between survival and death. Amberly made a deliberate choice to leave her most valuable asset hidden in a standard guard unit rather than recruiting him into her own team. If the gunner's nature became widely known, rival inquisitors would try to claim him. Hiding him behind a commissar whose fame provided cover kept the null safer and more useful than any inquisitorial posting could have. A particular quality of the aide's nature had an unintended effect on the political officer's legend. People who were saved by both men almost always left the gunner out of their retellings. His deeply unpleasant presence, from permanent skin conditions to body odor that could clear a room, made survivors want to forget that he had been there at all. Every rescue, every impossible escape was credited to the commissar alone. The aide never seemed to mind. In his own simple view of the world, everything his officer did was part of a grand plan, and his role was simply to be ready when needed. He once solved a case of suspected treachery because the quartermaster's inventory reports were too accurate. He knew that only happened when someone was trying to hide something. His terrible driving was legendary across the regiment. He never crashed, but cafes, cemeteries, and governors' palaces were all treated as minor obstacles to drive through. The missions themselves covered the full range of the Imperium's enemies. In 928 Millennium 41, the veterans survived a direct encounter with Necrons on the world of Interitus Prime. Watching the ancient machines phase through solid walls scarred him more deeply than any other experience in his career. On the massive void station Kappa Septim, he identified a chaos cult led by the station's own watch commander, Goran Barlow, whose attempt to seize the facility would have cut Imperial supply lines across the entire sector. On the aquatic world of Deepwater, the political officer investigated alien-backed traitors in a mission that shifted from diplomacy to a targeted strike. An assassin used a Tau plasma pistol to murder the planetary governor. The weapon directly linked the killing to Xeno supporters operating inside Imperial systems. The investigation revealed how far the Eastern Alien Empire had spread its influence, using political allies to achieve what their military could not. One of the most significant operations involved the Space Hulk Spawn of Damnation, as recorded in the book The Emperor's Finest. The Commissar served as liaison to the Reclaimers chapter of the Astartes during a boarding action aimed at clearing a gene stealer infestation from the ancient vessel. The Hulk carried both Xeno's parasites and orc infestations within its twisted corridors. During the operation, the veteran and his aide were forced to make an emergency teleportation jump through the Imperium. Raw psychic energy surrounded them both. Amberly noted in her records that the gunner's null nature shielded him from the worst effects, allowing him to recover significantly faster than the political officer. The investigation traced back to the planet Viridia, where the alien cult had engineered a planetary rebellion to weaken the system's defenses. The parasites operated through a shared brood mind, coordinating a subtle war between greenskins and humans aboard the Hulk, while planning something far more complex than simple hunting. One late-career operation stood out above the rest. During the events recorded in the storyline of Choose Your Enemies, the veteran and the 597th were defending a world from an Eldar invasion. A Slaneshi cult took advantage of the fighting to summon a demon princess in the governor's palace. The entity had targeted the reluctant hero in a previous encounter and remained obsessed with him for reasons the sources never fully explained. The gunner's null field and the Inquisitor's resources both proved insufficient against the creature. Amberly called in support from the alien fleet already fighting in the system. What arrived was an avatar of Cain, the Eldar war god's physical form. The avatar dropped from orbit like a living missile, landing directly on top of the warp creature, crushing it before turning on its followers. One of the rarest victories the ancient war god had achieved in modern records. Throughout all of it, Amberly Vale remained more than the political officer's handler, his closest ally, his romantic partner across decades of shared danger, the person who understood him better than anyone in the galaxy, providing rare moments of peace in a career defined by terror. Her protection, including the life-extending treatments she arranged for both the veteran and his aide, kept the Imperium's reluctant hero in the field far longer than anyone could have reasonably expected. The lessons he had learned across a century of hidden wars would soon be passed to a new generation. The cadets he trained at the Schola Progenium would face their final exam, not in a classroom, but on a battlefield where everything he had taught them would be tested at once. Chapter 5: Instructor and Veteran. The cadets at the Schola Progenium on Perlia called him Sir. They stood at attention when he entered a room, treating every word he spoke as though it came from the Emperor himself. The veteran who stood before them in 993 Millennium 41 had liberated their world, killed a war boss in single combat, and carried a service record longer than most of their lifetimes combined. What none of them knew was that the first lesson he taught, that fear was a friend because it sharpened reactions and kept soldiers alive, came directly from a century of personal experience running from everything that terrified him. He called his students young pups, told them that the soldiers who felt no fear were simply the first to die. As noted in the editorial framing of the book, The Last Ditch, his cadets treated him with something close to worship. Even small gestures from the hero of the Imperium were met with awed silence. The instructor remained the most accomplished swordsman in the sector, taking quiet pride in leading his cadets to victory in every competitive match except those against the Sororitas trainees, who apparently proved beyond even his abilities. Fellow veterans served alongside him at the academy, including Colonel Mostra. The retired officer also continued serving as liaison to Lord General Zyvan, who consulted him regularly on threats across the sector. Even in official retirement, the Inquisitor and Zyvan pulled him into active service during a Genestealer uprising in a region called the Cascades. The galaxy had no intention of letting him rest. The Nusquam Fundamentibus campaign dragged the instructor back into full combat, dispatched to the remote-ized world to deal with a greenskin problem. As detailed in the novel The Last Ditch, the veteran discovered something far worse buried beneath the planetary surface, a Tyranid swarm frozen in the ice for 7,000 years. It had existed long before humanity had any presence in the region. The alien bioship fragment had been regrowing beneath the capital, coordinating the local swarm with increasing efficiency as the ice around it thawed. During this deployment, the retired officer guided a junior commissar named Forrest, fresh out of training and completely unprepared for the scale of what they faced. Walking the younger officer through the crisis while managing a planet-wide emergency revealed a teaching instinct that the reluctant hero would never have credited himself with. He coordinated a planetary evacuation of millions of civilians, using his fame to maintain order and prevent panic. The planetary governor used his name in official broadcasts to justify the evacuation, knowing that citizens would follow instructions if the legendary political officer stood behind them. To destroy the alien swarm's command center, the veteran personally led a mission to sabotage the planet's underground power plant. The resulting volcanic eruption swept through the alien-infested tunnels, destroying the regrowing bioship entirely. The next crisis came in Fecundia, a forged world that produced half the weapons and ammunition for the sector, as recorded in the novel The Greater Good. He deployed with Zyvan's fleet after helping negotiate a fragile peace agreement with the Tau Empire to face a mutual alien threat. For the first time, Imperial and alien forces cooperated against a common enemy, and the Eastern Empire opened negotiations based solely on the veteran's presence, recognizing his reputation for integrity even across species lines. After surviving a crash landing on the Forge world, the retired officer led a defense against wave after wave of alien assault organisms. Inside a Mechanicus shrine, he exposed Magus Kildar, a tech priest who had been corrupted by a Xenos cult 60 years earlier, breeding alien bioforms within the facility. The traitor had operated under the parasite's influence for decades, hidden within the very institution supposed to defend the planet. His tactical solution broke the invasion, working with an apothecary of the Reclaimers Astartes chapter and a psychic communicator called an astropath. He coordinated the use of a captured bioship node to broadcast a jamming signal. This disrupted the alien hive mind's control over the swarm. The bioships in orbit fled. The ground forces collapsed into mindless animal behavior. The signal effectively shattered the invasion by turning the Tyrannid's own biology against them. On the starship Fires of Faith, during transit between deployments, the political officer and his gunner fought a demon that had fused with the ship's mechanical systems, possessing the vessel's cybernetic crew, attempting to seize control of the entire vessel. The encounter proved that nowhere was truly safe, not even in the spaces between wars. Throughout these later campaigns, the aide remained at the veteran's side. Both men had received life-extending treatments from Amberley, pushing their lifespans well past normal limits. His null status continued to be the hidden factor in every engagement, canceling out psychic threats that would have killed any other pair of soldiers. The only time the retired hero had ever shown signs of genuine emotional shock in his entire career was on Gravilax. A tunnel collapse led him to believe his companion had died. No other near-death experience across a century of combat produced the same reaction, and that single moment said more about the bond between the two men than any official record ever captured. One of the most revealing details about the veteran's character emerged through the writings of Janet Sula, the junior lieutenant who had served under him in the 597th, eventually rose to the rank of general. She later wrote that in every difficult command decision, the first thing she asked herself was what the legendary commissar would have done. In her mind, the answer always involved charging fearlessly into the enemy. That was what she had watched him do throughout their years of shared service. Reading this in her published memoirs, the retired hero noted privately that what he would have actually done was run in the opposite direction. He can never say so, because admitting fear would have destroyed the trust that held the entire system together. The instructor had trained his cadets, fought alongside them on Perlia, and watched some of them graduate into a galaxy that was about to tear itself apart. What remained now was the question that had followed his entire career. Who was Ciaphas Cain really? The answer depended entirely on which record you believed, the propaganda, the memoirs, or the actions that spoke louder than either. Chapter 6: Final Years and Legacy. On one side of the galaxy, recruiting posters bearing his face hung in barracks across 100 worlds. On the other, a single data slate sat under inquisitorial seal, the private confession of a man who believed every one of those posters was a lie. His life produced two competing records, and the final chapter of the story depended entirely on which one you believed. The public version was To Serve the Emperor, a Commissar's Life, an official autobiography published around 005 Millennium 42 that the veteran himself dismissed as fake religious devotion and backward-looking excuse-making. A cleaned-up account designed for public release, presenting a career of selfless devotion and courage. The historian Stententius Logar recorded the political officer as a champion of military virtue whose leadership had turned the tide of entire planetary conflicts. General Janet Sula published her own account, like a phoenix on the wing, in 101 Millennium 42, portraying her former commanding officer as a quietly heroic savior of humanity. Amberly noted in her records that the general's admiration for the man she had served under likely extended beyond the professional, something the veteran himself never appeared to notice. The private version, the Cain Archive, told a very different story. Written during retirement with no regard for order, the memoirs were the work of a man who believed every honor he received was undeserved. Every act of perceived bravery was actually self-preservation, and every soldier who admired him had been fooled. By the end of his career, the retired hero was well over 200 years old. He had spent every one of those years waiting for the next disaster to finally expose him. Amberly Vale found the archive and disagreed. In her editorial notes, distributed as a restricted document among her fellow inquisitors, the Ordo Xenos agent argued that the veteran could not see or would not accept that soldiers fought harder under his command because of who he was, rather than because of tricks. Leading from the front while terrified was not cowardice. It was its direct opposite, as detailed in the editorial framing of the omnibus Ciaphas Cain, Hero of the Imperium. His partner preserved the archive because it provided future inquisitors with a realistic and practical guide to surviving the horrors of the 41st millennium, a direct challenge to the suicidal military thinking that the Imperium normally taught its officers. Her conclusion was blunt. A braver man would have died in his first engagement. A more honest man would have been executed for cowardice. His particular combination of skill, fear, and social intelligence allowed him to survive situations that kill space marines and outlast threats that consumed entire worlds. One striking detail about the veteran's mental strength stood out across all accounts. Despite nearly dying dozens of times, facing alien horrors that drove other soldiers mad, and spending a century in constant combat, no record from any source indicated that he ever suffered a mental breakdown or showed lasting signs of combat stress. He wrote about fear in his memoirs, often at great length, but fear and breakdown were not the same thing. The only exception was the Gravilax tunnel collapse, when he believed his companion had died. That single moment of emotional collapse, triggered not by personal danger, but by the thought of losing his closest ally, said more about the man than any battlefield honor ever could. The institutional impact of his career extended far beyond any single campaign. Statues stood in his honor, including one in Liberation Square on the Whirl of Tailthorn that he joked had been ruined by local wildlife. His name was cited in training materials for generations of future political officers, and his approach to leadership, building loyalty rather than ruling through executions, became an alternative model within an institution that traditionally favored a bolt pistol as its primary motivational tool. When a fellow commissar told him directly that the Emperor seemed to look out for him specifically, the veteran brushed it off, a standard response about the Emperor protecting all his servants. The other officer pushed back, noting that divine protection appeared to apply more heavily to some than to others. The evidence was difficult to dismiss. The retired hero had survived encounters that killed entire squads of Terminator armored Astartes. He had outlived threats that consumed worlds, and he had done so with a combination of timing, instinct, and apparent luck that went beyond any normal explanation. One theory, explored in several analyses of his career, suggested that he may have been a hidden psyker, abilities showing themselves not as visible war powers, but as supernatural luck and instinct. He felt his aide's null repulsion more strongly than others, always complaining about the gunner's smell and skin conditions in his private diaries. Other people found the companion merely unpleasant to be around rather than physically revolting. The Emperor had demonstrated the ability to override psychic void fields when protecting chosen servants, suggesting that divine or supernatural protection could still function near the null. Whether this theory held weight or whether the veteran simply had extraordinary survival skills sharpened by a lifetime of fear remained impossible to confirm. On the desert world of Talarn, a small, extreme group within the Talon Desert Raiders regiments began worshipping the political officer as a living instrument through which the Emperor's divine will had worked directly. A religious text known as the Book of Cain treated his career as holy writing within the structure of the Imperial cult. Amberley noted this would have deeply bothered the veteran, who privately referred to the ecclesiarchy, humanity's official church, as Emperor Botherers, holding little patience for religious worship of any kind. Whether the retired hero was truly alive or dead remained officially unresolved. He had been reported dead so many times throughout his career, only to reappear, that the military's bureaucratic administration eventually issued a permanent standing order. Commissar Ciaphas Cain was to remain on the active duty list regardless of any reports of his death. When he was finally laid to rest with full military honors, the paperwork still listed him as active. The bureaucrats had simply grown tired of putting him back on the list every time he turned up alive. Space Marines who encountered him after one such report greeted him by noting that they had been informed of his death and that they would tell his regiment about the mistake. By that point, it barely raised an eyebrow. As described in the editorial notes of Ciaphas Cain, the anthology, Amberley had the means and the motive to stage his death. The Inquisitor wrote the editorial note, declaring his death for a document she then distributed to other Inquisitors. The possibility that she was providing cover for a man who had finally earned the right to disappear could not be ruled out. The galaxy did not need him to be alive, it needed the idea of him. Here was a man who was not a fanatic, not a blind believer, not a superhuman warrior blessed by genetic enhancement or divine power. He was a normal human being with normal fears, normal weaknesses, and an overwhelming desire to live through whatever came next. And he won every time, against every enemy the galaxy threw at him. He found a way. His soldiers knew it, his enemies knew it. Even the Tau, who had no reason to trust any Imperial officer, recognized it. The only person who never believed it was the man himself. Ciaphas Cain questioned his own courage for his entire life. History recorded something different. His record on the active duty list remained permanently open. The Inquisition sealed his archive, protected his secrets, and shaped his entire hidden career. They also command their own chapter of Space Marines, warriors pulled from every legion and sent on missions no one else survives. Watch the full story of the Death Watch here.